Hello. Welcome to our second collaboration and live event. I'm Stacy Sherman, Customer Experience, otherwise known as CX Advisor, keynote speaker, and the host of Doing CX Right podcast. I am thrilled to engage in this conversation with Soul Growth co-founders Stacy Gonzalez and Renee DeVore, especially today, International Women's Day. We bring you a variety of stories and diverse experiences. For all our listeners, please introduce yourself, where you are listening from in the chat. I'll also pay attention to your comments and questions, and we'll do our best to address them as time allows during this session, or we'll follow up. Before I dive in, we thought it would be insightful to share with you some facts about professional women leaders. Did you know that new research indicates 43% of women leaders feel burned out when compared to 31% of their male counterparts? Successful women in midlife who have been climbing the career ladder are choosing to prioritize themselves and step down from their high-powered corporate nonprofit roles to shifting priorities, burnout, shifting priorities, burnout, and lack of support. The world is watching as strong, fierce women like New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern and Sheryl Sandberg of Meta decide to step down from their roles to recharge, reconnect, and determine their next chapter on their own terms. Today, our goal is to have a conversation where our stories may ignite and spark inside of women and many supportive men who are wondering how to get unstuck and have a better balance between their personal and professional lives. We hope to empower women to begin to think deeply about their careers and the types of experiences that can help them embrace the challenge that they're facing and find inspiration that they desire to take the next steps in favor of who they want to be and the life that they want to live. Now, let's get into some lively conversations and actionable tips. I'm here with our amazing panel, Renee DeVore and Stacy Gonzalez, who are the co-founders of Soul Growth, a company dedicated to empowering women to embrace new experiences and live life that they love. Both Renee and Stacy are former educational leaders who found themselves burnt out, and after climbing the corporate ladder, the career ladder, they made a shift. Stacy and Renee, I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you. And to kick us off, Stacy, I'll start with you, and then Renee. Please chime in and tell me what is challenging the status quo mean to you relative to your career journey?
I muted myself and then started talking. So thank you, Stacy, for opening up this really important conversation and moderating this for us today. That challenging the status quo is such a great, in the opening, you talked about these really strong, powerful women that we all kind of know and aspire to be like and love, who have said, no, thank you, not anymore, not for me. And it's been so interesting to me as I put myself out there and my content and my story around similar experiences where I'm deciding to choose me first, which I think is challenging the status quo. And that status quo may not be in the culture. I think it lives inside of the hearts of many women. It's bumping up against who they think they should be versus who they want to be. And so challenging the status quo is really an opportunity for us as women to say, here's what I've been doing, what I thought I should do, what it looked like in my career. And I'm 48 now. And I've decided, like, I don't really care. Things are going to look different because I'm going to choose me first. And for me, that's been what challenging the status quo means for me. What about you, Renee?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of similarities there for me too. I think that I've lived a life of challenging the status quo. When we think of status quo, we think of comfort, right? although it feels good sometimes to be in that comfortable space, I've always wanted to get out of that comfort zone because I know when I go there, I end up growing. And so I feel like, as I said, I've lived a life of challenging the status quo for myself and then the way others also perceive me. Um, an example of that is after a few years of being a teacher in my hometown, I decided to just kind of take all my stuff, sight unseen, move to San Diego, which we all know is beautiful. And, how horrible could that be? But really, that was like the first time I had really kind of decided, like, I'm going to step out of my comfort zone, do something that my family would never agree to. None of my friends in the area that I was with would ever think of doing something of that sort. And then I began to see the value of that. I began to see the value of stepping out of my comfort zone and going to a place I've never been to before and, learning new things and meeting new people and experiencing new ways of life and culture, so on and so forth. And from that point forward, I kind of got hooked. I got hooked onto this idea of like, getting into spaces that made me feel uncomfortable, whether that was schools, whether that was positions within my career, whether that was, taking a year off when I started to get burned out from education and packing everything up, selling everything, moving to Mexico for a year with 2 suitcases and my dog. I feel like I've lived that life of challenging the status quo. And I will say, as a 49-year-old woman who's never been married, doesn't have kids, and has really just lived a life of experiences in a lot of different places and just kind of let my heart guide the way, I think that is challenging the norm of what society believes I should be doing and who I should be. What do you think, Stacey? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that. And I also encourage our listeners in the chat, share your definition. What does that mean to be challenging the status quo? And I think that it's a learned skill. I don't believe we're born to know how to do that. I think that society actually sometimes has stifled us. You were in the education system, I grew up in the corporate world, and I think that we've learned not to challenge. So it's actually a pivot in itself to be able to challenge, speak up. But of course, there's a right way, a right time, and a right place to do that. So let's talk about now the warning signs, the whispers that you're getting stuck, because you really have to pay attention to what's happening. So I'm going to start with Renee on what does that mean, the whispers? How did you hear it? And what do you do about it?
Well, I'll start with the last question first. I think you have to be open to seeing the whispers and hearing the whispers around you, first and foremost. I think when all of your senses are aligned and you're open to seeing and hearing those things that are happening around you, you're more available to taking that in and reflecting and really engaging with what does that mean for me. My whispers really started in my first 3 years after teaching that story I just told about moving to San Diego. When I moved after those 3 years, at that point, that was a whisper to me that I was trying to get out of teaching because I was trying, I don't know, I went in to get sell life insurance, and that was a terrible idea. And I fell back into something comfortable, which was teaching again. But when I look back at my story, there were little points along the way, these whispers kind of along the way that were telling me that I wasn't really aligned to where I currently was or where I was going. As I left, I left San Diego and I continued to teach and I got into being a school principal. Those feelings started to, arrive again. It wasn't really until I got back here to Chicago. I was probably in my 6th or 7th year of being a principal where the feelings in me were so strong in that I knew that there was just something not right with where I was currently in my career. And, we'll talk about this probably somewhere down in this episode, but I got handcuffed, the golden handcuffs, right? I was making really good money, more money than I ever thought I could make. And I began to think that that was the most important thing. And I kind of forgot about myself until there was a point where I just kept listening to the people around me saying, you're miserable, right? You keep talking about not wanting to be a principal. You've said it over and over again. You've been saying it for years. And when you begin to hear that and you really begin to soak that in, that was kind of the impetus for me to really check myself and take that year off that I did to Mexico and reevaluate like where I wanted to be, where I was headed. I fell back into education after that year. I'll just put that out there. But that was the beginning. That part, that move to Mexico was the beginning of my journey in figuring out that I wanted something more for my life than what I was giving myself.
I think that is magnificent because not only did you shift, you listened to the whispers and you shifted not only professionally, but personally, you went to Mexico. I mean, right? Like that's not a small little whisper. That's like a big leap.
Mm.
And the fact that you actually left and came back and you like that's very normal. We don't know what we don't know. But I give you so much credit to take the chance as you were trying to figure out. And
Mm.
it's easy to stuff away the whispers, but it sounds like you were really listening at that time.
Absolutely. I think I've always been open and I've always been someone who follows their heart and really checks their gut. It's when I get caught in my head too long and I overthink things that things begin to go awry, right? When I just spend too much time up here, things begin to go awry. But when I'm
Mm.
really following my gut and following my heart, that's when things begin to open up. When I start speaking my truth, when I start saying, these are the things I'm thinking about, that is when things just begin to open up for me. So, and that has been true pretty much for my entire adult life.
Yeah, I love that. And I would say that as I had climbed the corporate ladder, it was not easy to get a seat at the big guy's table. And I did listen to the whispers and said, don't give up. I did listen to the whispers that said, okay, you weren't invited, but through relationships, you can get yourself invited. And then when you're not, you've got to evaluate and say, am I in the right room?
Mm. Mm.
And I didn't go to Mexico, but I did go to another another company.
Same old, same old.
So yeah, so okay, so let's talk now about what do you do when you challenge the status quo, you ask for what you want, and it's met with resistance. And I'm going to start with Stacy on this. And I just want to also highlight that we teach our kids and our nieces and our grandchildren and to advocate for yourself. This generation is really learning that, but we didn't have that growing up as much. So I'm curious, Stacy, how did you break through the resistance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the first thing to keep in mind is yes, you advocate for yourself and you are responsible for your advocacy. So, what you show up with and how you advocate for yourself, that you control. You're in charge of that. You have complete autonomy to plan that, to prepare for that, to think through that. In last session, I talked a little bit about me going in, asking for a title change, kind of settling. I probably wanted a raise and a promotion, but I was like, I'll just happily take a title change, right? Obviously, I wasn't valuing myself. And in retrospect, now looking at it, the response I got was really bad. I was passively aggressively targeted after I did that. I was pulled into meetings and scolded. And I, at the end of the day, am not responsible for the response, for other people's responses. What I am responsible for is figuring out what those responses tell me. And what I couldn't do at that time, because I didn't have the awareness, the openness, the capacity that I have now, because I was so stressed out and I was so anxious a lot of the time. And so what I wasn't able to do was see who they really were. What was that telling me about them? What was it saying about me? And what was it saying about the people? To your point, Stacey, about removing ourselves. And it took me another, I don't know, year, 9 months, a year to get the F out of there and be like, this is not the place for me anymore. Maybe it once was, but that dream is gone. And I got to stop trying to make something out of what's clearly not here. And that drove me down a really dark path that I probably needed to be on for my own soul growth journey.
I think that the lesson here is that maybe early on, people put us in a box. The question is, do you keep yourself in the box? Because you do have a choice to get out. But it does take courage. It does take resilience. And you do have to ask for what you want. And I want to also highlight and encourage people who are in a job, no matter what industry. If you are afraid to take the pivot, take the plunge out, maybe it's not the right time, maybe you have financial or other reasons. Something I did in 2017 is I started a side hustle. I started passion projects while I was in my day job. I did it at night, I did it on weekends. And here I am years later, and I still have that I've been nurturing and growing. And it gave me a source of strength. So I want people to realize that that's a real thing. If you don't have the courage to go to Mexico, if you don't have the courage to literally throw it all away for self-preservation, there is a crawl, walk, run opportunity.
I thank you for saying that. That is so important. And I think had I had listened to the whisper earlier, not dismissed that, kept pushing it down, I maybe wouldn't have been to the point where I was breaking down. I would have been able to see that there's other things or other ideas out there for me. And so I love that you're bringing that up. You know, for many of us who are in some sort of a middle age, we've built our career to a certain place. The thought of stepping away from that or turning your back on that feels almost like turning your back on a child, right? I built that. I did that work, especially women who are of my age. It takes a lot to get to whatever the top is, right?
Yeah.
And so to be able to put that energy into something you love, that's where Soul Growth started. Renee started an Etsy t-shirt shop to create something that made her feel good, that she could share out with the world as not even as a side hustle, because she didn't think she was going to make any money on it until Stacey Gonzalez came along and been like, this is a business. But right, like it's about following your heart, and you have passions that maybe you've forgotten about. So I love that, Stacey. I love that you brought that in.
Well, also, it's not just about passions. What also we have to overcome is titles. I mean, you are a principal.
Yeah.
Right? You're a principal. And I, was in the C-suite, and that's hard to change the title or make your own new title, which takes me to the next question. And that is about core values. How do you define? Did you always know your core values? Have you figured that out to be different? And how has that changed your experiences? So let me ask that first of Stacey.
Yeah. I think we underestimate the power of really, really intimately knowing our values. Because if we really spend the time processing through what our values are and what they look like in action, we then have an accountability to uphold that to ourselves. We don't have an accountability to anybody else, but if we sit and we take the time to, the way I did it was I whiteboarded out. I thought about words that resonated with me, value words. We have an activity that we'll share here for people who are following along. But those words are just words. They don't mean anything until you put a context and have a conversation around them. That conversation starts with yourself first. So I started to think, okay, well, I picked communication, integrity, and trust. Those are my 3 core values. But those are just words. What does communication really mean for me, Stacey Gonzalez? And what does it mean when I do it from a place of integrity, right? Adding on my second core value. What does it mean when I'm talking to my son, when I'm talking to Renee, when I'm talking here? I wanted that experience of who I am and the core values I have to be aligned in every single place and situation where I show up into the world. The grocery store, this conversation, a job opportunity. And that for me started to change things for me. But it also put pressure on me. I don't know if you've ever heard anything like this when people first start going to therapy. Therapists will say, people think they're going into therapy and they're going to, especially people who don't know about therapy or haven't gone very often, they think they're going in and you're going to get the answer right away. And like, things are going to get better. And typically what happens when you start exposing some of these things is more stuff comes out. You start to feel and see all these other things. And so, I just want to caution you, take your time. Don't do your core values in a day. You have a lifetime to work that out. So that's where I would say I started. And I think that's probably a good place to start.
What about you, Renee?
Yeah, and as I hear you talking, Stacey, I'm beginning to think, core values are an evolution. I think that they can, they'll always can be a foundation, but I'm almost thinking when you're talking about this, and also part of what we're doing and we want to do is for people to listen to those whispers, to know their core values, so they don't get to the place like Stacey and I have gotten to in our educational careers. And granted, it's gotten us to a much better place here, but that you don't have to get to that space. And I was thinking when you were talking, Stacey, how beautiful it is to think about what if we were to put this in front of like younger people, people in college who are like discovering and exploring their values and how that connects to their future career, right? So at least they're in this process of learning about that. The core value work has had such an amazing impact on opening up my mind and spirit to these new ideas. I never in 1,000 years thought that I would become an entrepreneur ever, right? I still kind of am like sometimes like, am I really going on this journey? But when I really sat down to look at my core values, yes, the Brene Brown core values, wonderful worksheet to kind of go through to help you begin to think about your own core values. And as I started to do something very similar as what Stacey just uploaded, courage showed up as one of my core values, standing up for my beliefs. And I think I was always really good at that. Even as a kid, I was really good about standing up for what I believed in, being courageous and speaking my truth. And I think that showed up, just in courage and all the things that I've done throughout my lifetime. What also showed up for me, which was this creativity and need to be expressive, like this need to be creative and need to be expressive, which I didn't really know I had until I actually moved to Mexico. And in Mexico, I had so much time on my hands. I remember talking to my therapist, who by the way, I brought out of retirement when I moved to Mexico because I had so much time on my hands. I didn't know what to do with myself. I started engaging in like painting, like just, I don't know, putting dots on basically a canvas and calling that art. But that's when I began to envision like a wine bar that I wanted to create. And all of a sudden, like my space just opened to be able to think more creatively. And that has carried me to where I am today. Stacey talked about, opening up the Etsy store. I would have never thought about doing that when I was in the space of being a principal because I didn't have the energy or space or the capacity to think about doing anything else by the time I got home. All I wanted to do was deflate my brain and go to bed, right? But now that I have this open space and I also understand that my core values, one of my core values is to be creative and expressive, that feeds my soul. So this whole thing with the Etsy store was really about like taking my gift and putting it out into the world, one t-shirt at a time. But it also was feeding my soul because I was able to be creative and expressive and share who I am on a completely different stage. So those core values are really important. And I'll end with this as well. I think what I've learned, I was 6 months without a job of employment. And I was really going from the box of a public school system, right? So being courageous, wanting to be truthful and honest, and wanting to be creative and expressive. Those are your core values. Those don't necessarily fit well within a public school system, right? Those are like what we want people to have, but they kind of shut you down, right? They put you in that box. And when I left education, I was trying to go back to some level of comfort. Even though I was leading a 25-year career, I was trying to go into corporate, which really to some degree is another box, right? There's safety in going from one box to another. And I realized once I examined my core values, that I don't want to be in a box. I want to be free. I want to be independent. I want the opportunity to choose. So I'm excited about like people getting in and looking at Brene Brown's core values, because I think it's a really important part of our journey. Stacey, what do you think?
Yeah, I love all of this. I think that if you don't know your values, then you're going to a company, a brand, they're going to define the values for you. So if you don't know yours, you can't possibly match, and then you're living by someone else's values. So I think that also is why it's so important to do the work. And that way you are, because we talked about this, Renee, that you have your values, it didn't match where you are. And therefore you wonder, why am I unhappy? Well, it's right there in front of you, but unless you know that. So everyone do the work, know your values, and make sure that you're in a place that shares that same purpose. I want to get to the next question because we have a lot here. So to be able to challenge the status quo, I want to think about which question I want to ask because we're running out of time here. So can you share a bit about how did you make the choice to pivot? Renee, how did you actually say, okay, I know my values, I know it's important to me, but gosh, I have the title, I have the money. How did you actually do it? Because people are probably listening and saying, okay, that sounds all nice, but what was the igniter?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think out of pain comes the need for change, right? And so I've kind of shared all of these whispers along the way that was telling me I needed to change. Even when my mental health, when I first was in Chicago before I moved to Mexico, like that should have been a really big wake up call for me. And then I ended up going to Vermont, falling back into my comfort zone and falling back into education. And I knew very early on that I shouldn't have come back to education. And, COVID hit. I was there 6 months later or 8 months later, COVID hit, carried an entire school district through COVID. And it was October of 2021 where my partner had called me and told me he was going to be late coming home. And I don't know. I just went into bed. I just crawled into bed. It was like 6:15. I crawled into bed and I just started crying. And I eventually just slithered off the bed onto the floor. And I just went into paralysis. My face, my hands, everything was paralyzed. I had no idea what was happening. I thought I was having a stroke. And it was a panic attack. And I had never had one before. And it was at that moment, literally that evening, I had gone back in my mind. I had these flashbacks like, you have been trying to get out of this for so long. You've been trying to, since you were in your first 3 years of teaching, you've been trying to get out of this. This is the sign for you to let go. And I called my boss, my superintendent that night, and I just said, I'm not coming back. I'll finish out the school year, but I'm not coming back. And I ended up taking another month off to get myself recentered so that I could finish out that year. But unfortunately, it took me to get to that point for me to decide that it was time for me to pivot. And quite honestly, I've never looked back since. So I think Stacey has a similar story, different journey, but similar story as well.
Yeah, it's different when you make the choice versus the choice is made for you. So
Mhm.
as people are losing their jobs now, it's either way, there there is a point where you have to come to terms with the change and get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I think that's an important part. So what you do when the choice is made for you,
Mm.
um, I would say that there's a real grieving process. And pay attention to that because I know for myself, I luckily, knock on wood, I haven't lost anyone in a long time in terms of death. But grieving's not just death, grieving is a loss of any kind, right? So I tell people that even if you don't choose to lose your job and you lost it, you have to grieve. If you made the choices you did, but you know what, you still grieve the people that you worked with, the people that you were important to. Like there's still a loss in gains.
Mm.
So give yourself the ability to go through the process, but then set a date because then you got to rise above it and get out there and ask for what you need, which is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Mm.
What do you think, Stacy?
Yeah, I love the way you think about that. Um, I also, when you were sharing, I was thinking there's also a grieving of your former identity, right?
Yeah.
A role you've played, a comfort space of who you know yourself to be, who others know you to be. And when a part of us knows that we're losing that or that's changing, that's a very natural reaction. Um, and as women, we have a really unique ability typically if we're centered and we can tap into that space inside of ourselves where we can allow that emotional energy to flow and we can be open to that and allow our emotions to provide us with information that we need because we have to kind of let that let go and let it flow is a little bit of what we say, right? Let go and let it flow. And that's really one of the things that no, the choice may not be the choice that you thought you made. But either way, the choice is made. And so you have a decision. And I love what you said. Maybe it's I'm giving myself my own pity party for 2 days or not even that, whatever it is. And then I'm back on the horse. I'm figuring out what I learned. What did I learn about myself? What do I now know that I didn't know 2 days ago before I was fired? Right? I got fired in December for the first time as a professional, right? And I learned as after I was able to process and sit down and make a list of all the things. Here's the thing. I missed red flags. I thought of red flags in the interview process that I missed because I wasn't in alignment with myself. I was trying to be to Renee's point, I was getting back into another box. I was trying to be somebody that I couldn't be or that I didn't want to be. And so when the choice is made for you, know who you are, know your values, and operate from there.
Hmm. Renee, where can people start from your perspective? What are some good first steps to getting unstuck and gaining clarity?
Yeah, I think I think well, number one, the core values. I think this worksheet that Stacy placed up for everyone. If you haven't done this and you know Brene Brown, you know that there's some quality stuff there. But I think that core value. I wish I had that long before because I think that would have helped open some things for me that maybe I wasn't aware of before. And I don't know if I had known that, I may not have had to get to the pain point that I did, truthfully. And I will say that the core values isn't just enough to just do it. It's also important to talk about that, right? To talk about your core values. What did you come up with? Find like a confidant or somebody who can support you and can listen well. and share those values and think about how does that align or not align with what you're currently doing, and what does that look like as far as what you're seeking in the future. I think that that's a really important part to this process. And I also think staying open, right? I think we can get really fearful of all the unknowns, the uncertainty in front of us. If we can kind of just shut those fears off for a little while and just kind of let things, as Stacey said, let it go and let it flow. When you know your core values and you know what you stand for, and you begin to talk about those core values, things begin to open up for you as you begin to converse with others, right? The more you talk about it, the more clarity comes into your world. So I think that that's an important place that I feel has worked for me. What do you feel, Stacey? What do you think has worked for you?
Well, we have two Stacys.
I know. Sorry.
So I will just add here that there's building blocks. And, I listened to you, Renee, about, again, going back to Mexico. And I think, whether it's clear or not, that your ability to have just done something that different and maybe extreme to me, but so good, so different. You learned that you not only went and were okay, you actually thrived and got to where you are now. So I think that we all have to look back on our lives too and realize that those big leaps we took, you were more than okay to be as ammunition to help you go forward now. Right? Those are all building blocks.
Yeah. Raising my hand. I want to chime in because I needed an eat, pray, love, but I have 2 kids at home and a husband here. And like, that wasn't going to be the thing that I felt like I could do. Could I have done it? Sure. You can do anything you want, of course, but I didn't feel like leaving for a year. I wanted to. So what I had to do instead of that was I had to start finding the things that brought me back home to myself, right? Because Renee went to Mexico to get reconnected with herself. Mm-hmm. We're living in a triggered society where everybody is walking around anxious, stressed out, worried all the time. And there's that energy that is out there is really hard to combat. And so I had to find the practices, the experiences, the things that I had just maybe heard about. And I really let it unfold before me. And I would just try things like, oh, you want to go to yoga class? Okay. You're going to want to go to a gong meditation class? All right. Like, and then you want to read this? I've heard somebody shares a book. I'm going to read that book. Like, I just kind of let the journey unfold before me and did the things that I could do with which were in my sphere of ability versus get on a plane, unpack with 2 suitcases. Maybe you can do that, but maybe it's small, other little things for you to reconnect with yourself.
Yeah. It's getting comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I would also, go ahead.
Keep going, Stacey. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go on.
Yeah, I just felt like, the Mexico thing for me too, it was out of desperation. Like, I didn't know what else to do and where to go. And so I had just come back from vacation and it felt like there were people there who had been living there for like 3 months and they had jobs. I'm like, why can't I do this? It was out of desperation that felt like the only way that I could remove myself from all the things that were challenging me professionally, which also trickled into me personally, like my title, carrying around a title that I didn't feel aligned to, that I didn't like saying out loud to people, right? The pressures that I felt on that, to be able to go somewhere without a label, so I don't expect everybody can go, to Mexico. I did that to some degree out of desperation because I didn't know what else to do. I just felt like that was the cheapest place, one of the cheaper places I could go and live for a year, and also walk through Mexico as myself. That was what came out of Mexico for me. So it isn't for everybody. And I think that there are definitely different paths that people can take in order to get what I received from that time there.
I look at Mexico as a metaphor because for me, my Mexico was I started a podcast, right? So we all have our Mexico things that bring us joy, especially when you're stuck in the day thing and you don't have what you've been fighting for. And sometimes you're fighting with yourself because you don't even know what to ask for. But there are small things that you can do that are not necessarily physically moving around the world. So it is a metaphor, and I want people to understand that. Now, this question's for Stacy. So it's very hard. It's easy to say, okay, I'm going to do my own thing. I've got the courage. I got my values. I've got my alignment buddy. But the reality is that money can get in the way. Money mindset, revenue generation. This is uncomfortable. So what is your perspective for those saying, God, I want to make the shift what you did, but that money thing, what's your advice to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that for strong women who desire to be very independent, who are, corporate, have made it through the ladder and are corporate execs, that's our benchmark. We hear it all the time. A man makes this, a woman makes this, a Black woman makes this, right? Like even more ridiculous. And so that metric and the messages around money that women specifically have been fed for most of our lives make it even more challenging, especially if you're the breadwinner, which I am, Renee is, right? And you are, right? We gave it all up. We walked away. Now, fortunately, we have really awesome male partners, allies, supporters who believe in us, who will stand by us, who will do their part to support the family and the dynamic and the bills and whatnot. But it's not easy. I'm not going to lie to you and say I have that figured out. I don't. I went from a corporate job. I saved 6 months of my salary thinking like that's enough. It's not. It wasn't, because I really wanted to do I didn't build this. I didn't do what you did, Stacy. I didn't have a side hustle that I could maybe turn up the heat on and start to move that and spin that flywheel. I didn't have that, right? So it takes time to build that organically. And if you want to build something in your business or your company, like we are with Soul Growth, we're starting from zero and we're building from there, and that takes time. So the money mindset piece, if you can work on that now before you make the leap or before you pivot or decide to pivot, that would be my suggestion. The other thing is, for me, like I'm doing now my own inner work around that, setting my intentions, figuring out where my limiting beliefs are, figuring out how I can change my thinking and the emotions tied to it and all that work. Because Renee and I want to be super successful, as do you, Stacy, and we can't do it. I've been in these tech startup spaces. It's ridiculous the way men walk in, give a 20-minute talk, and then they're handed checks for millions of dollars. Maybe that's a little eccentric, but it's nowhere near as easy as I've talked to women founders.
Yeah, so much to unpack there. I think what's important for people to take away is create a plan. And if you know your North Star and you create your plan to get there and you celebrate those milestones, then you will achieve your goal. And it's okay not to know. You just have to lean in. If you get a coach, if you have an alignment buddy, but that's key, is to create a plan so you know where you're going. Because someone once told me, it's like, if I wanted to drive to Florida, I'll get there. But if I have a map, I'm going to get there a lot easier with that GPS. And if I don't have that, it's going to take me a really long time. So I think that's an important lesson too. Anything to chime in, Renee?
No, I think that that's true. It's, you know, no, I'll just leave it there. I think you guys covered it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you now both my favorite question that I ask in my podcast. And that is, if you could go back in time to your 20-year-old self, based on what you know now that you didn't know then, what would you tell the younger you? So I'll start with you, Renee.
Yeah, I think it's just to let your life unfold the way it's supposed to unfold. And I think I've always kind of I don't know that there's a whole lot of difference between I mean, there is. I mean, let's be real, 29 years of difference and experiences. So there's no doubt from where I was in 20. I think when I was 20, I thought I would be married by 25 and have no, not just married, but married and 3 kids by the time I was 25. That's what I thought, right? And when 25 came and that didn't happen, I was like, oh, well, but I'm in San Diego now, so I'll just go and enjoy myself. And I think that I've always kind of carried this notion of just like, just follow your heart and do what feels right there. Of course, I'm probably not the one to go to when thinking about, the strategic plan that you should come up with when you're making such moves or you're switching jobs and that kind of stuff. Mine is really just from the gut and from the heart and what you're feeling in that moment. And not to compare yourself to anybody else around you, because everybody else around me was doing something very different. I took the road less traveled. So when we talk about challenging the status quo, taking the road less traveled, that was me. And I would go back and tell the same thing to my 20-year-old self to just let life unfold the way it's supposed to. Everything happens for a reason.
That's beautiful. What about you, Stacy?
I think if I could sit down and have dinner with my 20-year-old self, like first of all, how cool would that be? Right? And when I think back to that woman, that young woman who's just starting to get to know who she is at 18, I met Tim Gonzalez, right? And so I was the follow your heart girl. I was the live your dreams, and it doesn't matter. It'll all happen and unfold perfectly, beautifully, da da da. And then things got real. I got married. I had to pay my own bills. I had children. By the time I was 23, I had 2 kids. And so I had what Renee thought she wanted. And it little by little by little by little, I diminished my intuition, my feminine side. I also wanted to build a career, right? So I wanted to build a family and a career simultaneously. I wasn't going to give up either one. I wanted them both. And I wanted them both perfect and exactly how I pictured it in my head, right? And so that takes a huge toll. And I gave up a ton of myself. I lost my identity. I put my identity in the wrong things. I took it out of that deep place of home and knowing and deep spiritual belief and connection inside of me. And I put it into my career or being a mom or whatever the things were. And I would just tell her, don't dismiss that. Hang on to that spot. Be smart. Have wisdom. Use the experiences to learn and grow and tell you more about yourself. But I operated like such a man. I operated with not even like from a masculine energy perspective, a masculine stance. I was very direct and harsh, and you see my personality. So now add, which I think I'm operating in feminine energy now. So just imagine what masculine Stacey Gonzalez energy looks like, right? Like the intensity level for most people was like, holy. And so I think just being really balanced, being more balanced, being, reminding myself to like live from that space. And it's okay. Play music. I stopped listening to music. I turned music off in my life. Renee always has music on, right? And so like, part of soul growth and a part of us connecting is there's something really special and working with you, Stacey, now on this. there's something really special when women remove that competition, remove how they think things should be, remove perfectionism, and allow us to be who we are beautifully, perfectly as in this space, and the magic that comes when we come from this place together. And it's been so refreshing, and it's new for me, right? It's new for me with Renee, and now you're here with us, Stace. And so it's a really beautiful thing, but you won't know it until you live it, experience it, and try it.
I want to call out something you're saying that really hits me, which is allowing ourselves fun. Fun, like go out and play. You said play music, like it's like we have to actually really intentionally think about how you spend your time and how you spend your energy, and allow the fun in. Plan the fun if you have to until it gets natural. But I think we work so hard, and that's because we are balancing our responsibilities professionally and personally, that it is not easy. But if you're intentional with your time and your energy, you can do it. And I think if I had to go back to my 20-year-old self, like I would really know my values, spend my time with the right people that share those values where I haven't always done that. And I think just being really conscious of that, because I'm often a kid in a candy store. I get so excited by so many things. However, you gotta focus on what matters, because tomorrow's promised to no one. So yeah.
And it's taking the time to do a real honest assessment of yourself from from an outside, disassociated. It's not personal. Let me just, I when I work one-on-one, like with like a coaching client or something like that, I like to use this analogy and this technique, which is, if you were to stop at the end of your day and there was a video camera, a video crew that followed you around all day, and you went to rewatch that video with no sound on the video, and you went and you replayed the whole day, what do you notice about yourself? What do you see in your facial expressions and the way you walk and the way you move? What do you see? Now, at the end of the day, watch, there's going to be people who like, lay their head in bed tonight and do this. Now, what if you have audio only? You just separate that and you just hear the words that you said. What rises in you? What things do you hear yourself say that you're like, yes, that's a celebration, I got that right. Or, oh, I was really harsh and I said this XYZ thing. And then get real honest with yourself and figure out, what do you want? Is this who you want to be? And if it's not who you want to be, who do you want to be? Determine that and get that vision in your head and start working towards that. And it's a great life when you do. It's uncomfortable, but it's a better, happier, more valid, reliable life.
I want to comment on something you said, which is celebrating. Why is it so hard to actually celebrate your accomplishments of the day? Like, that's a practice. And I want to call that out because it's something that you have to intentionally do. And you're doing.
Renee's great at that. She really is. No, you are.
It's taken me a while to figure that out, though. It really has. And I think when I gave myself more space in my own life and my own head, it's like when people talk about creating a gratitude journal, or, waking up in the morning and, finding 3 things to be grateful for, going to bed at night and doing that. I think when you come from a mind of abundance and you're looking at it from abundance as opposed to like what we don't have or what we want, I think that there's a different shift and a different mind shift.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I want people to know that whether you do it old-fashioned on paper, or there's an app that I love, called the 5-minute journal. And it's literally 5 minutes. So in the morning you wake up, it prompts you with a few questions about how do you want to spend your day. And you really think about that. And I think it gives you 3 lines. You can add more. And it's I think intentional that if you could even do 3 meaningful things, like you don't have to do 20, like do 2, do 3. Be conscious of it. You write it down in the morning. And then at the end of the day, it asks you, what did you do? And how did you make the day great? And you give a smile, a frown, and it gives you a couple of questions. But it's 5 minutes the whole day. Who doesn't have 5 minutes? And it lets you put a picture of anything in the day. So you could, when you look back, you flip through and you're like, oh, I loved that. Oh, that was great. Or my dog made me laugh today. Like the smallest stuff can make you really smile. And so what we're talking about here is not hard to do. It's easy, and there's a lot of benefits from it. So as we are coming to an end here, I don't want to end, but all good things have to, or they'll continue, is what is your one takeaway that you want people to remember from everything we're saying and from your experiences? So I'll start with Stacy.
Well, first of all, thank you to all the people who have been with us for this. We appreciate each and every one of you. We are all available here to connect, to support, to when you feel like you're free falling, to hold your hand and say, yeah, we know it feels scary to free fall when it's uncomfortable. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any one of the 3 of us. I think the thing that I'm constantly reminded of, and the thing that I remind people who reach out to me, got a bunch of people who've reached out to me today, just saying like, thank you for my story. And I thank you for sharing your story. And I'm there too. And like, am I making the right decision? And did I, and I think the thing that I really, really want people to know is you already have it all inside of you. Everything that you need. You may not know where it's at. You may not know how to use that tool. You may not be certain. You may feel uncertain around it, but it's like the sun when there's clouds. The sun is there. It's facts. You get on an airplane, you bust through, and you're like, oh, there it is. You just didn't feel it. You didn't sense it. You didn't see it. And so when I'm feeling really low, and I have low moments, I'm like, okay, I can't feel it. I don't think it's here right now. But the resources are inside of me. I'm just going to do the best I can because this is the best I can do right now. So give yourself grace. Be kind to yourself, especially when it feels really hard.
And I'll add on to that. I think not only do you have it all within yourself, you have to make the decision to commit to yourself. I think if there's an action step that needs to be made is that you are important enough to put yourself as a priority. And when you make that decision to put yourself as a priority, then you're going to do the work necessary in order to get you to the place that you want to be. So I agree with Stacy that you have it within you. Sometimes you might need a little extra attention, a little extra help to kind of move that along and get that out. But ultimately, when you put yourself as a priority, you are committing to yourself that you're worth it and that you value yourself enough to put yourself above everybody else. Because when you do good for yourself, you do better for others as well.
Oh, yes. And I would also say for people that are like me, I'm in a fork in the road. I'm deciding my next steps. And so sometimes life gives you the pause. And when it does, embrace it, get comfortable with the uncomfortable, and you'll make the right choice if you embrace the pause instead of fight it. And so some people are deciding right now to leave a job. Some people didn't have the choice. Either scenario, you get to determine the status quo for you. You can pivot, you can change, you can challenge the status quo of what you've known all along. So thank you for everyone being here. Thank you, Stacy and Renee, for sharing the gift of you. And I can't wait to do this again.
Thank you.